Just a second, we're going to get started with our wonderful guest today. I'm so excited. And hi to everyone who is joining us on Zoom. So we just going to get started. Usually it takes a second for people to join us. So anyway, good morning to everyone who's hopping on, and good morning to people on Facebook Live. So to start, I just want to say that we have some incredible news today. Besides the fact that we have this incredible, amazing guest who I'm just so happy she could join us on this very special day for us, because Elevate Aviation today turns 5 years old. So it's just been an absolutely incredible journey. I mean, this journey started with a calendar to climb Mount Kilimanjaro to raise money with the Lois Hole Hospital back when I was a single mom and going through a really hard time, and I didn't know how to raise money, and I wanted to go with this group, and I thought it might be life-changing, and it was life-changing, but I had no idea how life-changing it was going to be. So that started with a calendar, and over the last 5 years we've grown so much, and we don't even galas where we feature inspirational women and their stories. We have tours and mentorship programs and bursary programs, and we're even doing pilot recurrent training. And we have a message from our guest today for that pilot recurrent training. That's coming up this Saturday, and you can watch that online for free if you like. There's so many more exciting things in our future. We have a learning center now, and we're looking at expanding that can't wait to tell you more about that in the future. We're even working on a documentary, and we're just in the development stage of a documentary. So there's just so much going on, and just so many amazing things that have happened in the 5 years. I just want to quickly say thank you to some of the team. Laura Foote, she's been there from the very beginning. Sophia Wells, Dina Jamez, Chelsea Wright, Jennifer Wallace, Jenny Smith, Nova Andrews, Alexia Hannum, our board of directors, our ambassadors, our volunteers, our sponsors and our supporters. We couldn't do it without any of you. And that also includes people like you who are watching this webinar and sharing the webinar and helping us grow our audience, because the larger that the audience grows, the more people we can reach and the more people we can inspire to live their best lives and a life they love. And the more people we can reach with inspirational stories like the one you're going to hear today from our guest, the chair of the Transportation Safety Board, Kathy Fox. I have to say, when I first met Kathy Fox, she was not at all what I expected. I don't really know what I was expecting, but I certainly was not expecting this warm, wonderful woman that was just so down to earth and open. I remember the very first second I met her, I was just like, oh wow, just not what I expected. I don't even know if that's a weird thing to say, maybe even, but so Kathy Fox started her career as an air traffic controller and spent 30 years in that role. And now she's appointed the chair, second term, I believe, right? Second term as the chair of the Transportation Safety Board. So we're going to talk about that and how you go from one to the other. And on top of that, she is a parachutist, a pilot, and a flight instructor. And she's still doing that today on top of her role at the Transportation Safety Board. And Kathy Fox is inducted into the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame. How does she do it all? And like, how do some people fit so much into their career and have such amazing careers and just seem to enjoy life so much? We're going to find out. So welcome, Kathy Fox. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Kendra, and congratulations on 5 years. It is a really special day. You should be very proud of everything you've achieved, and I follow your activities religiously and hope I can do more in the future to contribute.
Thank you. Well, I know we've talked about us getting together and doing that, and we were actually looking at a learning center down in Ottawa before COVID, and I was really hoping to have you part of that, but it's on delay.
As are so many things in our lives these days.
Yeah, it's been crazy. It's just a crazy time in our life right now. So, okay, right off the start, off the top, here is my first question for you. How did it feel to be inducted into the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame? Big question right off the start.
Hmm.
Like, how does that feel?
It was an incredibly humbling experience, and the evening. I mean, first of all, I found out in October, which was or December rather, which was about 8 months or 6 months before it happened. But it happened. It was the event took place at Canada's Aviation and Space Museum, right across the runway from where I teach flying and have been for over 20 years. So it was very, very special to be in that building in that context. I still get the shivers when I walk into that building, and to have family and friends, and to be inducted with so many pioneers of Canadian aviation that I've looked up to for many years. At the same time, I felt like I'm too young to be in a museum, so there's still a lot of things I'd like to do, but it was humbling.
Yes, you are too young to be in a museum. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine. I'm just curious, were you the only woman that year? Because I know there's been a few women in there.
That particular year, I was the only woman inducted. That was in 2016, and I was the 10th woman out of at that time about 240 members of Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame.
Oh, wow. Wow. Crazy. Okay, so now I want to know, were you always like back as a child, were you always interested in aviation? Is that and how did you find out about air traffic control? Because as you know, I'm guessing you knew someone who's an air traffic controller because that seems to be like the only
Mm-hmm.
pathway into
Mm-hmm.
ATC until recently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in fact, from the time I was a young child, 4 or 5 years old, I dreamed about flying. I used to climb trees and pretend I was flying a helicopter. I grew up in the age of, the first manned space flights. I dreamed of becoming an astronaut, a fighter pilot, but definitely a pilot. So from a very early age, I wanted to fly. And when I was 16, I had the money to actually learn to fly, but my parents made me make a choice between using my money to fly or going to university. That was very important to me. Um, Obviously, if I wanted to go on and be an astronaut or something like that. So I put my flying dreams on hold, went to university. And when I graduated, I didn't have obviously I didn't have a pilot's license. So, and there weren't very many women in commercial aviation. And a couple of guys that I'd gone to university with had joined Transport Canada's air traffic controllers. So I joke that I became an air traffic controller so I could tell pilots where to go. But for me, it was just an alternative way into aviation as a career, because at that time in the early 70s, it wasn't possible for me to work in the industry as a pilot.
So you must have been one of the first female air traffic controllers.
There were, I was one of about 5%. At that time, there were maybe 1,000 air traffic controllers in Canada, and there were only about 5% of us that were female. I did have other females in my class and also in the unit where I was assigned for my initial checkout. So we weren't such a rarity, but still, quite a few less than today.
Hmm, isn't that funny? I just find it so funny that we're not at 50-50-ish, there's just
Mm-hmm.
not more yet. But so your career as an air traffic controller, where did you start?
I actually checked out, got my initial ATC license in Sept-Îles Tower. Now, in fact, I was just there a couple of weeks ago because I went back to visit where I got my license in Sept-Îles. It's no longer active as a tower, it's now a flight service station. But in the course of my operational work, I worked in Baie-Comeau and Sept-Îles Towers, and then I transferred to Saint-Hubert Tower near Montreal. From there, I went to Dorval Tower, and then ultimately to the Montreal Area Control Center, where I worked in the North Subunit. So I had a really good mix of lower density and high density towers, as well as the IFR Center.
Well, so I'm curious, was training really like, everyone says being an air traffic controller is stressful, and we always say training is the most stressful. Was it the same then?
Yeah, it was, it depended where. I would say that both what was then Dorval Tower, now Trudeau Tower, and the center were challenging in terms of training. But I made it. And in fact, in Dorval Tower, I left at one point after checking out to go work at CEGEP in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, where we trained air traffic controllers at that time. And then I went back to Dorval, checked out again, and then I left again to go manage St. Hubert Tower, and then I came back. So I checked out 3 times in Dorval Tower. So I figured I was pretty proficient at the end. But yeah, training is a stressful environment because, as you know from your own experience, you have literally somebody sitting over your shoulder listening to everything that you say, everything that comes out of your mouth, and correcting you or coaching you, or, you know. And
Yeah.
it's not easy to have everything you say and everything you do sort of observed.
No, and I get to experience it again because of COVID. The last 2 years, as you know, Nav Canada has been paying me to really promote aviation, and I've been able to work from home and travel. And but starting next month, because of COVID, I'll be going back to ATC,
Oh, wow.
and so I'll be going back to that training with someone behind me watching
Yeah,
everything I say. It'll be a little
yeah,
different this time, but
yeah, yeah. I mean, it isn't easy. I can speak from experience, having left operations for several months, you know, to do other jobs to get back in. But once you get back in, you just focus and you know, have confidence, and you'll do fine.
well, we'll talk more about that offline.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So then, were you just watching all these airplanes, and it was starting to make you crazy that
Yeah. So
when you were in air traffic control?
So when I was in Sept-Îles, by then I had the money and the time to learn to fly. So I was working as a controller in Sept-Îles, and that was when I signed up and got my private pilot license as a controller in Sept-Îles. And then when I was transferred to Saint-Hubert, I continued flying initially out of Saint-Hubert and then out of Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. That's where I got involved, and we formed a company. I was involved as a co-owner of an aircraft charter operation, aircraft maintenance, and flight training school. So I kind of, from I would say the early 80s, branched off and had 2 parallel careers. One as an air traffic controller, and then the other as a company owner for about 12 years or 10 years, and a commercial pilot and instructor.
So, you know, every time I talk to you, I always get this sense of, well, just calmness for one thing, but like, I never get any sense of anger, and that's not even the right word, about the past. Like, you went through all these things you're talking about are all male dominated.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you were a female going through it, and it doesn't seem like there was any issue with that, and you just did what you wanted to do. Is that true?
I mean, I had challenges. There were certainly some work environments which I can think of things that happened to me or that were said to me that certainly by today's standards, I mean, they shouldn't have been acceptable 30 or 40 years ago, but it was part of the way of people, thought culturally, I guess. And I just found ways to overcome that and not let it deter me from what I wanted to do. I would think, especially in the ATC side, there were things that were said to me. We were talking earlier about, dressing up. And I remember I was working in the tower one day at Dorval. I keep calling it Dorval, even though it's changed names. And it had just been announced that I was being seconded to St. Hubert to manage that on an acting basis for 6 months. And I happened to be wearing a skirt that day. And one of my colleagues said to me, well, do you have to wear a skirt to get, promotion? And I said, no, maybe it's the fact that I have an MBA and I've been running a company, and, I've got all this other experience. It's nothing to do with my gender or what I'm wearing or how I'm dressed. So we did have to overcome some of it, but it was fairly, it wasn't as frequent as it might have been.
Mm-hmm.
And I found ways to get around it, mostly with humor and just calling it when I saw it.
Right. So you've been in aviation, we were talking earlier, you've been in aviation for basically 50 years now.
Yeah, yeah.
So, like, what have you seen change in 50 years? Anything? Like what and not even, like, I'd like to ask women in general as well in those 50 years, but even the industry, like,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of changes have you seen?
Well, I mean, there's been so many, we could have a whole discussion just on the technological changes that have occurred in flying and in air traffic control. But I look at it from two perspectives. First of all, I think it is definitely more normalized now to have women in various careers in aviation, whether it's air traffic control or as pilots, or the many other careers that are available. So I think that is one thing. It's less of an oddity. Not to say that there still isn't or aren't people that are surprised when they hear a woman captain on a plane, but I just say it's more normalized now. I think the other thing, and this is a particular interest to me in my role at the Transportation Safety Board, is that the way we think about accidents and incidents has changed significantly over the last 30 or 40 years. You know, we used to always blame the pilot or blame the air traffic controller if something went wrong. And now we're much more inclined to look at the systemic factors that contribute to accidents and incidents. And I think that's very important because that's the way we improve safety.
Yeah, so I think that's so interesting. So going from air traffic control to the Transportation Safety Board, sorry, how does that happen? Like, did you retire from ATC? Did you decide that you were just done with air traffic control? And like, what happened there?
So what happened is that in the early 90s, I left operational controlling and went to Transport Canada headquarters in an administrative and management position, and gradually progressed through a number of management roles. Then, of course, when Nav Canada took over the air traffic control system in '96, I moved to Nav Canada and assumed progressively senior roles there. So I actually left Nav Canada in 2007. I retired from the position of Vice President of Operations. When I announced my retirement, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do at that point. I know I wanted to fly more, I wanted to travel, etc. But through what I consider a serendipitous combination of circumstances, there was an opening as a member of the board at the Transportation Safety Board. And I happened to be at a dinner where I was chatting with the then chair of the TSB, and indicated I was leaving Nav Canada, and she asked me, would I be interested? And I jumped at it, because when I thought of it, everything I'd done, from jumping out of airplanes to flying them to controlling them, to my work at both Transport Canada and Nav Canada. Remember, I was the assistant, I was the director of safety and quality at Nav Canada for a couple of years. So all of that I thought prepared me really, really well to become a board member at the TSB. So I jumped at the opportunity, and the rest is, as they say, is history.
Okay, before we get into talking about the TSB, because I want to find out more about that, I want to stay in NAV Canada just for a moment. Well, about you really, like you've done so many different roles inside NAV Canada alone, let alone everything else. Like, what was that? Was that like, were you just not satisfied and you just wanted more? Were you just always like curious? Like, what kind of drive is that to, like, you've done amazing things inside NAV Canada.
Well, if I look at my whole career, starting from, you know, when I checked out right through to when I retired, I would typically stay in one place for 2 or 3 years, and then opportunities would come up. And I think these are interesting opportunities, challenging opportunities. And so I would take them. But speaking specifically to NAV Canada, when I transferred over, I was responsible for the evaluation of ATS operational facilities, so towers, FSS, and the centers, as well as investigating operating irregularities. And that kind of led me to a greater interest in safety. So that led to me becoming the director of safety and quality at NAV Canada, which was a great job because I reported directly to the then president of the company. I was exposed to the executive committee, to the board of directors, and so on. But and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about safety from that 2 or 3 years in that role. But then there were opportunities in operations, and I loved operations. So then I went back initially as director of ATS, then as assistant VP of ATS, and then finally as VP of operations. So it was all just a combination of the next step without actually planning it. And I don't think I could have ever planned it as well as it turned out. Just opportunities would become available, and I think I'm ready for that. So let's take the next step.
So for people that are watching, you know, a lot of people are often trying to figure out how to take their life to that next level. What do you suggest? Like just keep looking for these opportunities?
I do think that you have to be open to opportunities, even opportunities that take you outside of your comfort zone. I remember when I left operational controlling to go to the CEGEP in Saint Jean, we were literally taking a leave of absence from Transport Canada, and the agreements weren't fully worked out. So I knew I had a job to come back to, but the conditions and so on were unknown. So I took a leap of faith. I went, and it was a tremendous opportunity to spend three and a half years involved in training air traffic controllers. And so I think it's being open to opportunities, being willing to go outside your comfort zone, and also letting people know that you're available. For example, in my case, I knew deep down that I wanted to go into management at some point. I had these reticent leadership skills, which my grade 5 teacher pointed out in a report card. So, I actually applied on competitions that were way above me, but by doing so, I guess I drew attention to myself as somebody who was interested in moving on or moving up, and so therefore more opportunities came to me. That and education. Like, I graduated with a Bachelor of Science from McGill, but then I went back to school, did my master's degree in business administration. So it was taking advantage of those opportunities or those things that I thought would help me move on without actually knowing where they would lead.
Wow, that's incredible, because we hear over and over and over again, a difference between men and women, that men will apply on anything and women will have before they'll apply. But you just said the opposite. You applied on things that maybe you thought you wouldn't even get.
Mhm.
That's unusual.
Yeah, and I recognize that, but I thought it was a great opportunity to get experience in those kind of interviews. Now, I mean, on paper, I met many of the qualifications. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been called to an interview. So whether it was education, and a lot of my initial management experience came outside of Transport Canada and Nav Canada, because it came from managing my own company. Because I was a shareholder, I was a co-owner, but I was also the financial manager. So a lot of that, plus, doing things like leading operational controlling to go to the CEGEP, taking acting appointments, were all opportunities for me to grow in experience. And I think therefore led people to say, well, let's interview her and see, what she can do. And even though I didn't, as I say, win those positions, they are absolutely what led me to, for example, leave Quebec and go to Ottawa to Transport Canada headquarters back in the early 90s. So those were very pivotal moments in my career.
I love that, because so many people are, as you know, are afraid to fail. And
Mm-hmm.
so they won't even apply in a position because they're afraid to fail. And what encouragement that is to say, just do it for the experience. It's not failing. It's
Exactly. It's I learned a lot from those occasions. And as I said, even though I wasn't successful, at the end of the day, they opened up a whole bunch of doors that might not otherwise have been open to me, because people simply wouldn't have known I was there.
yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's great advice. And I'm going to share that advice with other people too, because we get a lot of questions, with Elevate. We do get people that contact us, and not just getting into aviation, but how do
Mm-hmm.
they grow
Mm-hmm.
inside aviation? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll steal your advice and say it's from you.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about the Transportation Safety Board now. So many people, including me before,
Mm-hmm.
um, don't know that there's a difference between Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board. Are they the same thing?
Yeah, no, they're very different. And in fact, so Transport Canada is the regulator for aviation as well as rail and marine. Transportation Safety Board is the federal agency that is independent of Transport Canada, and our only mandate is to advance transportation safety by conducting investigations into air, rail, marine, and pipeline occurrences. That's both accidents and incidents. So, for example, the people of Transport Canada report up through the Minister of Transport, whereas the Transportation Safety Board, we report to Parliament through the President of Queen's Privy Council. So we're organizationally separate and totally independent of Transport Canada or any other government department.
And that's another interesting thing about the Transportation Safety Board, is that you are more than aviation.
That's right. And I think a lot of people, because they hear transportation and because they know, for example, my background, people tend to think, oh, it's aviation. But in fact, about 35 to 40% of our work is aviation. And then about 30% of our work is rail, about 20 to 25% of our work is marine. And then we do a few pipeline reports a year. But it's basically all modes of transportation that are under federal jurisdiction, which makes it even more interesting because I've learned a whole new vocabulary, a whole new industry as I've taken on, reviewing investigation reports in rail, pipeline, and marine.
So, and that's what I was going to ask you next. Like, what is your role as the chair?
So I hold a dual role. I'm chair and the chief executive officer. So as the chair of the board, I'm ultimately responsible for the application of our legislation, which has a long name, Canadian Transportation Accident Investigation Safety Board Act. So I have the overall responsibility for the management, the people, and the money that is associated with conducting our mandate. But as the chair of the board, I also work with the board members to review and approve the final reports that are issued to the public, as well as to issue recommendations. And we also issue a watch list and so on. So I have a dual role.
And is that normal in that organization that both roles are usually one person?
It can be. There are other small agencies like ours, and our board is not a governance board. I mean, you'd be familiar with, say, the board of directors of Nav Canada. They provide oversight of management. The board at the TSB is only responsible for reviewing and approving the final reports and issuing recommendations. The board as such doesn't have governance oversight of the management side. That's the role of me as the chief executive officer. And of course, I have chief operating officer and then other executive members of the team that do that. So it is rather unusual. And again, because we report to Parliament through a minister, and our relationship with the minister is primarily administrative. So we don't take our orders, if you will, from government. We have our mandate, we have our policies, we have our strategic plan, and we basically run our operation in a way that achieves our mandate, which is to advance transportation safety.
And am I right to say that there's about 220 employees?
That's correct. It's about that, 220 employees plus the 5 board members, including the chair, 3 full-time, including myself, and then 2 part-time members. And then those, most of our staff are investigators or associated with the investigations, and then they're broken down as well by mode, air, rail, marine, and pipeline, except for our engineering and human factors group that are multimodal.
I was going to ask that. So someone who goes out to investigate an airline accident won't go and investigate a rail line. They're separate people?
So if we're talking about technical investigators, then let's talk about aviation. So we could have pilots, we could have people with a maintenance background or an aeronautical engineering background. They'll typically focus on aviation accidents, but they're part of a team that could consist of an engineer or a human factors person who, in their work, they are multimodal. So our engineers that work at our lab out near the Ottawa airport, I mean, they work on multimodal accidents. Our human factors, they can be on an air accident one day and a rail accident the next.
And are you always looking for people? Because I know, some people, they finish their career as a pilot or, or they just want to change. Like, are you interested in taking applications for people that are listening?
Absolutely. And I would encourage anybody listening to this to go onto the TSB website. You can just Google Transportation Safety Board of Canada or just www.tsb.gc.ca. And on our homepage, there's a career section. It talks about the different careers that are available at the TSB and the types of backgrounds that we're looking for. I would say that if you're talking aviation, when we hire pilots or people with a maintenance background, typically these people have already acquired experience in the industry. So it's not necessarily an entry level for those categories, but certainly somebody who's mid-career or maybe later career who's looking for a challenge. It's a great place to work. We do great work. The people who work there are extremely dedicated because they know the work we do, the investigations, the findings, the reports that we issue can make a difference, in terms of saving lives in the future and improving safety. So yeah, so we do have opportunities, but we're not a large organization. On the other hand, like most organizations or many organizations these days, we have, a high turnover coming in the next few years because of, people getting, approaching retirement age.
Mm-hmm. So Captain McKee, I want to say hi to you. Hello.
Hi.
He has a question here.
Sure.
He says, thanks for taking part in the webinar today. You must have been part of some interesting investigations, either air or rail or naval. Has there been one that has made an impact on you more than another?
I mean, certainly and I've been now at the TSB for 13 years. There are certainly those that stand out for one reason or another. I think that most people in Canada will have heard of Lac Mégantic and the terrible tragedy that occurred in a small Quebec town when a train rolled away and derailed, spilling 6 million liters of crude oil. That certainly had a major impact on me. Of course, as a board member, we don't deploy to accident sites per se. That's up to the investigators and the staff. But still, finding out what happened, why it happened, can have a significant impact on all of us. Another one that stood out for me on the aviation side was the loss of first air flight up in Resolute Bay. I was actually up in the Arctic when that accident happened. I was on a vessel on a cruise going through the Northwest Passage. And so it was a really interesting investigation to find out what happened and why did that aircraft not land safely. But I also had the opportunity afterwards to go up to Resolute Bay to brief the community. This was before I became chair of the TSB in March of 2014. I went up with the investigator in charge and we briefed the local community of about 200 people. And then we visited the memorial to the crash high up on a hill behind the town. And I stood there in minus 44-degree temperatures with the wind chill with the investigator in charge and with one of the family members of who'd lost so much in that crash. And it was just an incredibly moving experience. But a lot of good came out of that investigation in terms of improvements to transportation safety with respect to some of the issues that we found in that. So yeah, there are some that certainly stand out.
When you make recommendations, do they have to be followed? What's the rule around that?
So the TSB makes recommendations more often than not to ministers, and because 3 of our 4 modes are regulated by Transport Canada, more often than not to the Minister of Transport. And in accordance with our legislation, the minister has 90 days to respond to the board as to if, when, and how our recommendations will be implemented. Now, you're right. Our recommendations are non-binding, and theoretically, ministers could turn around and say, well, we're not going to do anything. But the reality is that some 83% of all of our recommendations that have been issued, and there have been over 600 since the TSB was formed in 1990, 83% in all modes have been, that is combined, have been fully, the responses have been assessed as fully satisfactory. So it shows that we are making a difference as a result of these investigations and recommendations that we issue.
Wow, I never really thought of this before, but you have a lot of, like when you get a call, that phone call is not always good for you, I guess, when you get, is that what happens, that there's an accident? Like when there's an accident that happens, you end up getting a call and saying, hey, this just went down, and do you know right away?
So it depends on the nature of the accident, but for example, we have all the occurrences, both accidents and incidents that are reportable, are defined under our regulations. And so people know what needs to be reported. We have a 24/7 line that they can call if we're either air, rail, marine, or pipeline. And there is an investigator at the other end who will respond and then make a decision as to whether to deploy or not. Obviously, if it's a major occurrence, then yes, I will find out very soon thereafter, and certainly before we deploy a team to the site. But I used to get those calls when I was VP of Operations at Nav Canada. I remember getting a call at 3 o'clock in the morning when a 747 crashed on takeoff from Halifax. And it took a few minutes before I was told it was not a passenger 747, but a cargo. So it's interesting to see now how it looks from the other side when these things happen. And obviously, when there's fatalities, that's tragic. But we have a job to do, and we want to make sure that we find the answers to what happened, why it happened, and more importantly, what needs to happen so these things don't happen again.
Okay, this just popped into my head. I wasn't going to ask this, but I am. UFOs.
Yeah.
Like, do you like? I just read an article the other day that there's some conspiracy theory about more and more UFOs and everything else. Have you had any, not contact with UFOs, but does that come
Yeah.
through your desk at
No,
all?
no, no, no. I can remember when I was an air traffic controller getting calls about things, but no, unless one crashes, we're not we will not normally be called.
Okay, I just popped in my head. Yeah, I was just wondering. Okay, so Rona has a question here. She says, thank you for being here today. You have an amazing career as a woman in aviation. What do you feel was your personal greatest accomplishment?
Um, I might say surviving through all the different careers at this point. You know, I can't think in terms of my greatest accomplishment, because anything I've done, whether it was working as part of an ATC team or working as part of Nav Canada's executive or now at the board, it's always been a team achievement, and so it's hard for me to single out anything. I will tell you that I was proud of some of the things that happened while I was vice president of operations at Nav Canada. Things, for example, like certainly making more opportunities available in management ranks, both for women and for, we used to be stovepipe, that you had to be a controller to manage a control tower, or a flight service specialist or a technician to manage some other. And I think that we broke down some of those occupational barriers and some of the gender barriers, and got more diverse people promoted into that management. And I was very pleased about that. I was also pleased, and I took a lot of flack for this, that we introduced some better tools for our flight service specialists, including radar. So sometimes I took flack for some of these decisions, but I felt that they were the right thing to do. But
I
I think,
remember, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, I was just going to say, but I really, as I said, I think that learning to fly and having such a diverse career is probably my proudest achievement. And not any one thing, because I couldn't have done any of it alone.
I think moving people into something new can be awkward. Like I remember when CATS came in Nav Canada, the fight against
Yes.
that
Oh
was
yeah.
incredible. And
Yeah.
yet now we couldn't live without it. And
That's right.
radar into FSS stations,
Yeah.
like they would never want to live without that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a situational awareness tool, and because I fly today, and I operate in both controlled airports with ATC and uncontrolled airports with advisory service. There's an awful lot of times that I'm glad that when I can't see that traffic, that the specialist can see the aircraft and help point it out. So I think that anything that advances safety is good.
So another subject, ADS-B.
Mm-hmm.
So for people who don't know, there's satellites in the sky now that you can see aircraft in the sky that you could not see before. And one of the things that they promote is their search and rescue. And if an airplane goes down, they're able to see exactly where it went now. Have you guys used that data at all?
We have actually, and it's been helpful, particularly when we're trying to trace the last steps or the last moments of a flight. We're not using it from a search and rescue perspective, of course. That would be the search and rescue folks. But the data that we've gotten from some of that has been helpful in identifying what the aircraft was doing in the last moments prior to the accident, particularly when the aircraft isn't equipped with a flight data recorder, which many aren't. Now, I mean, we can sometimes get data from onboard GPSs, but certainly I can think of a couple of accidents where, the fact of having ADS-B data was helpful to the investigators in retracing what the aircraft was doing in the moments leading to the crash.
How many accidents are there, like aviation related, in a year? Are there many?
Yeah, well, there are occurrences, and I'd have to, I don't want to give the wrong numbers here, but we just published our annual report, which is available online. But I think, we're talking quite a few accidents and incidents in aviation. I'm talking more than 1,000 probably. Again, I don't want to guess on the numbers because I just don't have them at my fingertips, but they're in our annual report. That being said, we don't investigate every occurrence that happens. We don't have the resources to do that, so we have to choose which accidents we're going to investigate. Typically, if there's a fatality, we more often than not we will investigate. But if we think we're going to learn something new, then we'll investigate. But if it's maybe a pilot had a hard time landing an aircraft, challenging wind conditions or limited experience, we will assess and document that information, but we won't necessarily do a full investigation with a public report.
Okay.
So I can tell you that overall, we have around 3,700 occurrences that are reported to us per year, and that's in all modes, and about a third of that is aviation. A third
Okay.
to half.
Okay. Okay, here is another question. When you believe a new direction will be advantageous, but nobody shares your vision, how do you convince people to pursue it? Or do you sometimes just let it go because there's too much resistance?
Yeah, it can be a challenging thing, but I can, think of an example where I had to do that, and that was actually when I was at Nav Canada, and Nav Canada was upgrading all of the automated weather equipment. And one of the things that we wanted to add was ice-resistant anemometers, which added quite a bit of money to an already expensive project. So I think what you have to do is try and understand what are the issues that the others have, or why they're resistant to introducing this change, and then try and counter those with facts, not opinions, but facts and evidence that you can get from other sources, either internal or external. And that was an example where we actually used TSV data from an accident report to show that it was worth spending the extra money to have these wind instruments be ice resistant, particularly in Canada. But it was understanding what the issues are, trying to find facts to counter those, building allies, building alliances within a group, so that you gain, buy-in one person at a time. Those are some of the things that I found to be helpful. And I think one of my skills has always been the ability to see both sides of an issue. And sometimes there's multiple sides, not just two, but is to see different sides to an issue and then try and arrive at a solution that addresses the issues but doesn't give up on the important stuff.
That's a really good skill to have. Not everyone has that skill. So let's talk about COVID for a moment. What do you think about COVID in the aviation industry?
Well, I mean, COVID-19 has affected the way everything we do. And I think, it is a public health crisis. And in the absence of vaccines and proper treatment, I think everybody has to collectively work together to make sure that we minimize the loss of life and the risk to more vulnerable people. So that's sort of the general statement. I mean, it's had a horrendous impact on aviation, and we're seeing that now. We're seeing the reduction in traffic because what we're seeing is a reduction in occurrences since with the reduction in commercial traffic and the impact on the economy. We are seeing more recently more aircraft accidents involving light aircraft because people who own aircraft or rent aircraft are able to still fly. But it's certainly a huge impact on the economy. And I think the other thing is, as a frequent flyer and somebody who loves to travel, I'm not going anywhere far anytime soon. So I look forward to the day when we're going to be able to get back to business as far as the aviation industry is concerned, and be able to travel at will and broadly.
Yeah. Are the accidents in the general aviation going up because more people are actually out flying around in their small aircraft now because maybe they're working less or anything, or are they about the same?
It's hard to say this at this time of the year. There are certainly a number of aviation accidents, not necessarily fatal, fortunately, but still, that have occurred, and I'm seeing a fairly high number. But if you compare it to 2019, it's still too early to say. And 2019 was a bad year. Now, we just released our accident rate statistics, and if you look at the accident rate in general for all Canadian registered aircraft, the accident rate has been going down consistently for the last 10 years. But that's largely due to improved safety performance on the commercial side and not so much on the general aviation side. So I think a lot more needs to be done with that sort of sector of the industry to make sure that pilots stay current and better assess and manage their risk. And I say that as somebody who regularly gets into a small aircraft and goes up and teaches people how to fly.
I was going to say that. So you are a pilot and a flight instructor, and you know that we have our pilot recurrent training coming up out here in Alberta on the weekend, this Saturday. What advice do you have for the general aviation pilots that that we're going to be speaking to, that only fly maybe a few times a year, but then they go on flying breakfasts, and I see that on the radar screen, and I'm like,
Yeah.
But do you have advice for anyone who's out there right now as a general pilot on how to keep their skills up?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, taking courses or taking programs like Rust from Rivers are a great way to stay current and get refreshed. But I think it's also important to balance that with regular flying and importantly with flying with an instructor on a regular basis, at least once or twice a year. Because when most people go flying to a fly-in breakfast, they basically they go in, they get in, they take off, they fly somewhere, they land, and they don't necessarily practice the types of skills that they may need to call upon. For example, in the event of a forced approach, or maybe the winds are a little more gusty today, or maybe the runway they're going to is shorter than normal, or it's grass or gravel. So I think refreshing those skills in flight and preferably with an instructor is good for anybody, and even more so for people who don't fly that often.
Right. So you are a pilot and you are a flight instructor. Obviously, you must love it that you're the chair of the Transportation Safety Board, and you're out there teaching people how to fly. So where does that come from?
I started instructing in the early 80s, and teaching is something that I've always enjoyed. I was a teacher when I graduated from university before I became an air traffic controller. I was a trainer in ATC, and I've always loved the instructional side of it and watching people grow and build their skills. And I think given my experience as a controller and as a commercial pilot, because I flew medevacs and charters, I think that, and now coupled with my knowledge from our TSD investigations, I think I can contribute a lot to shaping and influencing, future pilots. So I particularly like teaching future instructors because they really are, it's really important that they have and pass on the right skills and attitudes and knowledge to their students. Who are going to go on and either fly for fun or perhaps professionally. So it's just something that I've always enjoyed, and I'm very grateful and blessed that I still have the health and the wherewithal to be able to do it, to teach flying. Now, one thing we didn't talk about, and I'll just go back to, I actually because I couldn't learn to fly when I was 16. That's why I took up skydiving. Back when
you
I
were
was
16.
Yes. My mother had to sign the agreement and wanted to take it back the night before I jumped, but that's another story. But that was a way for me anyway to get into aviation. And then once I learned to fly, I joke and say, well, once I learned how to land the airplane, I didn't have to jump anymore. So I don't do that part anymore, although maybe I will on some milestone birthday in the future. But I've just always enjoyed flying, the peace, the view, the being in control of the situation. And so I'm really grateful that I can still do it and pass on some of my experience. And some of it was hard won to other pilots.
And so do you still encourage people now with COVID going on? Are you still encouraging people to get out there and learn and become a pilot?
You know, I have to admit that I have mixed feelings because, for example, the club where I teach in the Ottawa area, I mean, we effectively shut down for a couple of months. And then as the province of Ontario opened up and started making, you know, more activities accessible, reopened, but with significant amount of public health precautions, like wearing masks. Now, I don't particularly like wearing a mask when I'm flying. I don't find it comfortable, particularly when it's hot outside. But I think it's the best way to balance between the public health concerns and you know, and being able to carry on living and doing the things that we want to do. I think it's a balance between the two.
And do you think like, you know, some people who are getting their license right now, that they should be discouraged, that maybe they won't have a job for a few years, or do you think it will come back a little quicker?
That's the big question, and I'm not going to speculate on what the answer is. I think if people want to become uh, commercial pilots, then they should pursue that. And recognizing though that the industry is going to be disrupted for a period of time, and we don't know how it's going to come back or when. So they need to have a backup plan, I guess is what I'm saying. But heck, if you want to learn to fly and you can afford it, then do it, because the industry will come back at some point, and there will be opportunities. So, but in the meantime, you've got to have a backup plan to keep, you know, keep a roof over the head and keep eating.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of affording it, I just found out some interesting news. I was speaking with, there's a group of women that are all getting their licenses out in Gander, Newfoundland, and the province is now paying for that. For,
Mm.
so you have to be a Newfoundland resident or native, I guess, and what was the other thing, from Newfoundland, and eligible for EI, I think. And they're
Mm.
paying for living expenses, your private, commercial, multi, the province will pay for the entire thing now to get your license out there. So I immediately called my MLA and said, hello, can we look into this for Alberta? But I thought that was a really good step that
Mhm.
they're making out
Mhm.
there in Newfoundland to help
Mhm.
people afford it, because as you know,
Mhm.
it can be a little expensive to get your
Yeah.
license.
Absolutely. No, it is very expensive. And I mean, everything's relative. But when I think back to, you know, when I started to fly, I mean, it's all relative to what you were earning, your earning power at the time. But yeah, it's a pretty significant investment to learn. And that may be one of the reasons that discourages people from, and women in particular, from following that path. Because there's a lot more opportunity. There's a lot more career opportunities for women generally, and where maybe the upfront investment isn't as high, and the, you know, starting salaries are a lot higher. So I can see where, you know, aviation is competing with other careers. Certainly pilots, or pilot training is competing with other careers that are available to young people these days.
Right. Okay. We only have a few minutes left, so I really want to just go back to a lot of the people who watch this are really looking for inspiration and just trying to figure out how to make their own lives better, take it to the next level. So, can you speak on that a little bit more? Like, you seem so easygoing, and nothing seems to really bother you. Like, and that's not just from this; this is from
Mhm.
other times I've spoken to you.
Mhm.
What is the secret to that? Is it because you were a controller and so it takes a lot to stress you out now, or how do you deal with stress even?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You know, we're all born with different personalities, and so I just innately have always been a little bit more even-tempered, which is not to say I don't get mad, but I've just generally been more even-tempered. I think the ability to see an issue from multiple sides helps me, so I don't get too reactive to one position, because I can see the other position, and I can, you know, try and reconcile the differences. For me, I think it's about follow your dreams. You know, none of us knows how long we're going to be on this earth. And I think the last thing you want is to be at the end of your days and think, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd done that. So I think, you know, follow your dreams. Don't, yes, you're going to run into obstacles. I found ways around them. If I couldn't go over them or through them, I went around them. And I think being able to cope with adversity, I think is a big thing. And I think that's something that maybe you can speak to as well, just from your own experience, is being able to cope with adversity, being flexible, open to opportunities. I think if you can kind of balance all of those, that really you can do whatever you want.
Wow. So I have another personal question about what you just said. When you talk about you can see both sides of things or
Mhm.
many sides of things,
Mhm.
as you say,
Mhm.
do you ever get in trouble for that? Like for not like just being so much on one side? Because I find that too. I find I can see people's sides, so I sort of play the middleman, trying to get it all, and often it can be like, why don't you feel what I feel on my
Yeah,
side?
yeah, yeah. I think it can be. I think it can be difficult for people sometimes if they hold a very strong opinion, and their opinion is based on what appears to them to be solid rock evidence, and so why don't you feel that way too? But I always have to think of it in terms of what is my role in this situation? What are my objectives? What do I think are the priorities? And how do I weigh these conflicting? I mean, there are times when you have to draw the line and say, that's it, like this is where I'm at. I'm not changing. But I also think I have to be open to other points of view. So it's kind of a case by case situation, and it's a balancing act. But I certainly try and listen and go as far as I think I can go without compromising my own beliefs.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. That about wraps it up, but I want to know, how many jumps do you have?
648,
Holy cow.
which seems like a lot, but I know people with thousands of jumps. So
Oh,
there are many that have far more than I do. But yeah, 648. But this was back in the day before the nice new square and rectangular canopies that land lightly like a feather. This was back in the days of round canopies and military surplus. And so I have to say that my body is paying for it today.
oh my goodness, that's crazy. Wow. Wow. To me, that's a lot of jumps. I've never done one. So maybe one day, if you go
Yeah.
for your special birthday one, maybe I can come with you and we'll
All
jump one
right.
together.
All
I'll be
right. We'll do it.
crying I don't want to go. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. You are a great leader, and for us to have this time to hear what you have to say on all these different subjects is just fascinating, and I know it will inspire other people. My biggest takeaway from everything that you said today is really, apply on things that you know no matter where they are. Like, don't be afraid of that, and don't be afraid of that fear of failing. So thank you for that, and just thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Well, it was my pleasure and an honor to be asked to participate. And again, congratulations on your 5-year anniversary. I can't wait to be here for your 10th.
All right. I'm sure we're going to keep going. We have a lot of things that we're working on, and who knows where the next 5 years will take us. We did so much in
Absolutely.
these 5 years. Thank you, everyone. If you're watching live on Facebook or watching here with us on Zoom, thank you so much for being here. And like Kathy just said again, it is our 5th anniversary today. So there may be champagne in my future later on today. And again, just a little reminder, we are having our pilot recurrent training this Saturday. You can go to elevateaviation.ca to learn more about that. And please, if you want to be a mentor in aviation, or if you want to be mentored, go to our website, elevateaviation.ca, and learn more, because we have people just waiting to mentor you. COVID has slowed down the aviation industry, of course, but we believe it will be back again, and it will be strong. And aviation, the people that are in it are just full of passion. And if you want to be, amongst the people who are passionate about what they do, take a look at the aviation career. So thank you guys all for being here. And Kathy, again, thank you so much. We will talk to you again soon. Okay, see ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.